Roger.
Here we go.
Yeah, I think you're pulling the wrong one. Okay, I'm ready to pull it down now. There was still a little bit left in the... Okay, don't hold it quite so tight. Okay? Say what? Say what? Okay, I think you're pulling the wrong one. Okay, I'm ready to pull it down now. There was still a little bit left in the...
Hi, welcome to the podcast. This is how it's going to start.
Yes. Here we are. The beginning of the podcast. Get ready. Sit down. Stand up. Plug in. Unplug it and let it rip. This is the executive buffet. Where Daddy drives his big red truck around and puts his hands on the branch with Johnny Pemberton.
Hey everybody, welcome to Live the Tape, also known as the Executive Buffet, also known as where you put the hands on the branch, also known as the only place where Daddy's big red truck is allowed to drive around as much as it wants. You hop in Daddy's big red truck and, well, when you hop in here, Daddy's going to drive you around and maybe take you on some bumps and open the door while we're driving just for fun. But you've got a seatbelt on, so you're okay. Everything's good once you're inside Daddy's big red truck, headed to the Executive Buffet. And boy, have we got a fucking executive for you today on the freaking buffet. It's a big time executive. I'm talking about major league executive action, the kind you can't just deny. The kind of shit you go into a hotel and you check in, you're like, who's that executive? That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about, okay? Talking about that. God, it's enough of the effects, right? Have you had enough of my effects? I think you have. Okay, so this is a great podcast. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. But first, let me just say, if you don't know, we have a Patreon page. It's patreon.com/live-to-tape. That's Patreon, however that's spelled, and .com, which is a period, also known as a .com/live-to-tape, one word. And there's all kinds of extra weekly and monthly goodies there for the different levels of financial engagement that you seek to become engaged with. There's that. Also, if you could and would and should, please rate and review and subscribe to the podcast. It's easy to do. You're probably already doing it, but you might as well because, just do that. And if you're going to write a review, don't write a shitty one because no one cares about that shit because it sucks. That's what always blows my mind. This is a little bit of a tangent, but you're watching like a YouTube video or something where like, oh, this is the most pure, wonderful thing I've ever seen. It's something like some guy in Afghanistan building a metal rim, casting it out of sand that he's doing with like minimal tools. Just something where it's super interesting, and the person who's doing it is not espousing anything controversial or even political or anything like that at all. They're just doing something that's very, very pure. My favorite thing, I think it's kind of inspirational actually, is just to see how many fucking people thumbs down that. You're like, how could you thumbs down this? Of all things. And to me, it's like, oh, there's always going to be somebody out there who's like, oh, that sucks. When it's like a kitten trying to give you a kiss. Don't kiss me, kitten. That kind of shit. I just
love it. I think it's just so funny and crazy that we live in a world where those people exist. And it's great, though, because we just have to realize they're out there, and we have to just, we have to be ourselves in the face of those people. So going back to what I was saying before, basically, if you're gonna leave write a review of the podcast, you can be that person if you want, but I'm just gonna laugh at you. I'm just gonna laugh at you. Okay, do that.
Also, the email for the podcast that I don't check nearly as much as I should is, what is it? It's liveToTapePodcast@gmail.com. That's livetotapepodcast@gmail.com. That's Gmail. That's Gmail. GMAIIIIIIIIL.com. Dot also known as a period. There's that. Rate, review, subscribe. If you like YouTube more than you like listening to stuff, if you like your podcast on YouTube, the podcast is now on YouTube. I'm looking at you. I'm literally looking at the camera right now saying, hey, you're watching this on YouTube. So if you're listening to it and you're like, oh, wow, I didn't know he was doing that. I'm doing it now. I've been doing it for a couple of them, and I'm really liking it. It's fun and cool. And right now, you can see what I'm wearing. I'm not going to tell the listeners what I'm wearing right now because then they have to fucking, well, I guess I could tell them, they could just imagine it. That's how literature works, right? Is you tell people the thing and they go, oh, I'm thinking of the thing you said, but I'm not going to say it because I want to incentivize the people who go to YouTube. So there's that.
Yeah, baby, we got all that stuff going on, ready to rip, dip, scrape, and tip. Come on down to the ripping ship, where we'll drop you off, hit you in the hip, and send you back out to wade through the shit. I'd like to introduce my guest, but first I'd like to introduce the person who's going to introduce my guest. You know him as Johnny Pemberton, also known as Kevin Tipcorn, Jason Pepperhouse, one of our favorite hosts of this podcast. Here he is to introduce the podcast.
There you are. Hey, it's me, everybody. Hey, so my guest today, I'm very excited about presenting this podcast, the one and only Andy J. Pizza from Creative Pep Talks. We've had a podcast before. I've done his podcast before. Both times, swimmingly excellent. This man is just a joy to talk to. I find his insights into creative career planning and just all these things surrounding that to be absolutely wonderful. And this was just like a scintillating conversation. I say that word scintillating a lot for two reasons, because it's true. And reason number two is because it's one of the better words that we have in the world, is scintillating. Also, know this is such a scintillating blaster of a podcast that Andy and I are both putting this episode out on our respective streams. If you haven't checked out his podcast, it's called Creative Pep Talks. You can find it easily by Googling and searching those words I just said. His podcast is it's great. It's been super helpful to me. It's been helpful to a lot of people I know who I've told about it. It's just great. It's one of those things where there's nothing like it out there. So I'm not going to belabor the point here. I'm not going to, beat the bush until all the nuts fall off the bush. I say that because I think about anytime, they say beat around the bush, which is, I think it's an old hunting term. But I was thinking about beating bushes, like with a stick. I think that that's how you harvest pinon nuts. When I think of a pinon pine bush, I think of it as being a bush and not a tree, even though it's technically kind of a tree, but they're kind of bushy. The idea of you're beating the bush. So instead of beating around the bush, I'm going to beat the bush, knock all the nuts out, and these nuts are presented for you here now. These delicious, fatty, perfectly priced pinon nuts here on Live to Tape with my outstanding guest, Mr.
Andy J. Pizza. Yeah.
T-minus 10, 9, 8. We have a go for main engine start. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Okay, I'm going to introduce you now.
Okay.
Welcome to Live to Tape. This is probably the second or third intro into the podcast right now I'm doing. Please welcome my guest, Mr. Andy J. Pizza.
Hi.
Live on the internet, streaming. Hi, Andy.
Hi. Happy
Cheers.
to be here. I don't have a drink.
Well, you know what? That's a big thing you got to have nowadays, man. You go into one of these conferences, you got to have multiple bevs. Stage.
I always want to have a carbonated thing, but then you're burping the whole time. And
yeah. Also, I cannot drink those. I drink those so fast
Yeah, me too.
I mean, I could, if I had like a row of them here, I would just drink 4 or 5 in an hour, probably.
You got a fresh cut. Is that?
Yeah, this is a home cut. This is a little bit janky, but it's you know what? Anything to make my head look narrower, I'm into.
Did you see my recent haircut is just the sides off?
Oh, really?
Purely for that reason, is it gives me some, length,
Yeah.
but no sides.
There is something really strange about having too much hair on the side, and I didn't realize it until very recently. I saw some YouTube video of Jenna Marbles and her boyfriend, I can't remember his name, Julian. She was cutting his hair, and he was talking about that. I was like, oh, that's what it is. It's not the hair in general. It's the hair on the sides. And I just had no idea. All these years of getting the same haircut, I didn't realize, oh, it's just that. It's the hair on the side.
One of the things I keep noticing is I keep looking at people that have really thin face that's like sculpted, and I see that they're able to really have a decent amount of hair on their sides, and I'm jealous. I'm like, oh man, they've got a face that can handle side hair, and I wish I had that.
Lucky.
Yep. You'll notice it now. Go look at a lot of these, fancy, really great looking actors that got this. And I'm like, damn it. I wish I could. If there's like more than a centimeter, I look 3 times fatter, and it's really bad.
Well, at least you know. Knowing is half the battle, right?
Yeah, I've heard that before.
So you're doing great. You're doing really good.
Yeah, I am. And other than, are you feeling guilty about the people that have to be out there?
I thought you were about to ask me something different. I thought you were about to say, are you feeling guilty about how much I'm self-medicating and napping and all that stuff? And I was about to say, I'm not anymore.
Yeah.
But no, I'm not feeling guilty about that. I think I kind of have this realization. This is a little bit maybe, I don't know if it's cavalier, but maybe it's not my place to say, but I kind of think I know a little bit about people who work in medicine. And because my dad I grew up in Minnesota where there's all these doctors and stuff in Rochester, Minnesota. My dad's a doctor. Everyone I knew was doctors. And as much as it is stressful for all the people who are working in healthcare, that's why they got into it, because they fucking love it. Like right now it's terrible, but at the same time, I got to think that they're
saving lives.
Yeah. And they're really getting to dig in. And it's like if you're a soldier and you're sitting in your fucking bunk 24 hours a day, you're not really enjoying yourself. But when you have that firefight, even though you're about to die, it's like you feel fucking alive as hell. And I think that's the case for a lot of these healthcare workers. Is they're like, I mean, it's dire, but they probably feel very alive.
I mean, I think the same can't be said for the people working at Burger King. The people that are, this is the reason I got into this thing, man.
Yeah, that's a different thing altogether. I mean, that's such a complicated thing, but it's also like, you know what? It's not, it can't be solved by me. That's for sure.
No, it can't. Not by me either. But I have 2 problems. This is a problem for me all the time. I'm very empathetic to the point of, like, when I watched my wife give birth 3 times, I was the insufferable husband who's like, I can't take this. Like, I can't watch this person in so much pain. I'm like puking. I'm passing out, I'm feeling it, not physically, but I am feeling it. And then I think especially true I have a hard time. I think all of us have a hard time, like, putting ourselves in other people's shoes. So for me, being behind a cash register is the most stressful thing in the world to me. It made me feel physically ill. So even if I go into a regular restaurant in a regular time, I still feel like that. I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for you. But I'm like, well,
really?
They don't feel the same as I do back there, but still.
Yeah. I guess that's that thing about where, it's a weird thing because a lot of times it's, we pay people, but we don't know them. And so it's almost like how dare you pity me?
Right. Yeah, totally true.
Yeah.
That's totally true. Yeah, that's good perspective.
I also think right now it's like cool. I'm gonna just tell everyone right now, if they don't know, you have this amazing podcast called Creative Pep Talk. You can see it on the banner behind you.
Yeah.
And the reason I really want to talk to you right now is I feel like, and in some way, this is probably like the greatest time to be a self-starting creative.
Yeah, I mean, I get into I've been listening to I listened to Duncan Trussell's podcast.
Right.
I was listening to, he was speaking with meditation expert. And then I listened to Esther Perel on Tim Ferriss' podcast. And there's a lot of talk on, not judging how other people grieve and letting. So some people are in a state where they need routine and as much action as they can get to stay at their best. And then some people need to like survive and go into survival mode, and they don't want to think about creativity. So I'm not here to judge anybody about how they need to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do want to use this time to do creative work, I think that I've been calling it the Corona cocoon. I feel like it's this period. It's the belly of the whale period of, you can go in. I've been also, I'm really into this idea of like strategic side projects, but I've been kind of swinging the pendulum to the other side of exploratory side projects. So I think two types of creativity: strategic and exploratory. And I think right now is a really good time to be doing exploratory side projects. Linda Berry, who's like a famous comic artist, said that, I think a lot of people try to go make creative work and say, this is my statement, but she would encourage you to be like, what's your question? Like, ask a question with your work. And then I think also in screenwriting, it's like, they say that, a movie that tells you the answer is like propaganda, and like, rather than like posing a question. So I think right now I'm thinking about what's the kind of work that I can make, not as self-expression, like a statement, but as self-excavation. How do I dig myself with creative work in this time where we're in this like belly of the whale? So like Joseph Campbell would be like, we're all experiencing belly of the whale right now. It's like the waiting.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it's this thing where if you have this chance to experiment, I guess it's also a way of saying experiment, right?
Yeah.
To do something you would normally do and just to see what happens, because there's no stakes.
Yeah.
Because no one's working. And there's no TV or films or anything. Nothing's being made right now on a grand scale. So anything you make is basically just almost throwaway kind of stuff. So you can. It takes a lot of the pressure off, even though the stakes are so high right now with everything else. It makes those other things not matter as much.
Yeah, if you got all that time, I think that's one of the things that when I was getting started. I wanted to skip. I tell this story on stage about how I wanted to do I'll start over. Let me just go back a little bit. Because when I went to school.
We got the time.
It's like, when I went to school, I wanted to be a gig poster designer. And I loved that all these artists that I loved had like crystallized their weirdness into a very specific style and voice. And I was like, that's what I want to do. And I was so cavalier in it almost, where I was like, went to school and I asked my tutor, all right, in first year, I want to find my voice. I want to find my style. They were like, you're an idiot. But their response to me was like, they couldn't give me any actionable steps. And that's so much about what my podcast is, because I found like, yes, there is a mystery to finding your style. There's a mystery to finding your creative voice, but there's also a bunch of like tactical, practical things you can do to take action towards that thing. And so anyway, I got into school and I joke about it saying like, I really want to find my style. And their response was like, find your style. Your style finds you, and it made me feel like giving up. It made me feel like if I go into that maze, I'm not going to, and I have no guarantee of finding anything. I'm just going to die in there. And I'm going to be just like the creative people in my life that, ended in tragedy, because who knows if it's going to work out. And so instead of going into the self-exploration cave of creative work, I wanted to come up with strategic ways of skipping it. So I always say I want to find the warp whistle in Super Mario 3, but for the art career. Like, how do I just get around having to find myself and get straight to getting a job? And that ended up like biting me in the ass really bad early on, because I didn't put in the work to do the deep self-exploration. And it wasn't until I graduated in the recession, things were going okay. I'd done some tricky tactical tricks. I don't know if you've ever seen my indie rock coloring book, but that thing went viral. That helped me launch my career. That was my Super Mario warp whistle. And then recession hit, and just like all the fluff and all the stuff that, all the new stuff that didn't have much roots in the industry was just gone overnight. And that included me, because I was just like a trick thing. And so it was about a year after school that I finally said yes to that maze and said, I'm going to do a deep dive into myself with my creative work. And I did this project where I did a new character every weekday for a year. And it was deeply in touch with everything that I really cared about my whole life.
And you're working really hard too. So it's something about that. There's a thing with that that's it's hard to remember that, I think.
Yeah.
It's even harder to actually do it.
Absolutely. I think there's definitely something about showing up every day and putting in time and having the discipline of that was really instrumental to breaking out. And I also, I mean, even in that, I learned all kinds of things in that time. I was doing all kinds of projects that were helping me find myself with my work and find and also develop my craft. But a lot of it was that exploratory stuff. And so, one of the things I think about now is this idea of you want a plate. You ever heard?
No, I haven't. You want a plate?
You on a plate. You ever hear Gordon
plate.
Ramsay say that?
I don't think I have. I've heard Gordon Ramsay say a lot of stuff. I haven't heard that one. You want to? Oh, I get it. He's like, what is you on a plate? Yeah. Yeah.
So if they're from the South and they, elevate a recipe with grits, they're like, this is you on a plate. And they're all like, man, wow, you really did it. And I think about that all the time. And I've come up with these activities of, what things could you put on this metaphorical plate where people would see it that knew you really well and would know it was you without your name. So,
that's a good, I was actually thinking about this just very recently, actually, because I have that happen to me a lot where I get, I just get confused and I kind of forget, wait, what is the thing that I do again? What is my voice? I just sometimes forget it. And I have to, the thing, somebody did an acting class years ago. I think the first acting class I ever took, they do this thing where they have, you sit in a chair in front of the class, you don't say anything at all, and everyone writes down what they think you are, who you, just by how you look and how you're sort of, everything about you, just fully judging you based upon just how you move and just everything about you. And then you read that back and you see all these assessments of what people have taken from what's their first impression of you. Obviously, people have a secondary and third impressions a lot of times, and we like them for that too. But for the most part, anyone you're seeing on any type of film or a movie or a TV shows, you're getting a lot of that first, that 90% kind of shit. And so it's that thing where you kind of you get to get this feedback from people that you can't give yourself, because you can't I suppose you can step outside yourself sometimes, but it's really hard to have that type of objective lens on yourself without having someone else do it. And it's the kind of thing where it's really hard to just get a bunch of people. Do I have to hire a focus group to come in and be like, can you please tell me about my
who am I?
That. Yeah, who am I again? Hire a bunch of people off the Vegas Strip and have them sit in a room and look at me and write down okay, so what do you think when you hear my voice? What does that make you think of? Stuff like that. Because
I actually want to do that. Yeah. That sounds. Yeah. I thought a lot about how, finding your style, finding yourself as a person, as an artist, so much about just the crazy journey of finding out what everybody around you already knows.
And they know it they know it so well. They're kind of what are you doing? Why are you driving a truck? It's I drive a truck. I love driving a truck. You don't drive a truck. Why would you look weird in a truck?
Growing up, I had an older brother, so I had that thing where I was everything he did, I wanted to do, and I made my identity. And I remember I worked at the movie theater, and my boss, who knew me really well, was like, what kind of music you like? And I was like, Tupac, Ja Rule. And they're like, what? I don't understand. I was like, what do you mean? And so I feel like it's those little moments where you stack enough of those together. I heard, like, I think Drew Carey on a podcast the other day talking about how, so much of the game is like just figuring out and coming to terms with how people see you and then owning it. It's like being like, yeah, that's who I am. And I think I was, I always, whenever we're on this podcast, I'm always aware of a lot of the examples I will use are from the entertainment world. And I'm thinking I'm safe in my little podcast, then nobody will hear it. But then as soon as I'm talking to you, I'm like, I probably can't use this example, but I feel like you hear, I won't say the name, but I feel like you see these people that wanted to be the next Will Ferrell, the next Adam Sandler, the next,
Right.
Jim Carrey, and everybody around them knows, like, who've seen him in roles and stuff. You're like, that's not going to happen. And if it is, you're going to do it in such a different way. You can't just go Jack Black. Like, it's just not, that's not going to be your path. It's going to be, have to be a different thing.
Yeah, or it's either that you have to swim upstream and that's what you do.
Yeah.
And you have to get used to being tired. or you have to fucking just kind of chill.
But I mean, but the point of that is that even like Zach Galifianakis, nobody that saw his Live at the Purple Onion would have thought that he had the Hangover in the future.
No.
So he had this thing, like he rose to the heights of those folks, but he didn't do it by being on Saturday Night Live, and he didn't do it by, he figured out this own road that was very in touch with who he is. And it still was mainstream in a totally different way. And I think that's the other thing I think about all the time is, like, that's the trickiest part is, I use the same example over and over, but is like, Gandalf and Yoda and your heroes, whoever they are, they can only take you right to the edge of how far they went, but everything doesn't get really interesting until you walk away from them. And that's total wilderness. So as an artist, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It totally does. It makes sense a lot. I mean, obviously it changes a lot for different people, like to find what that moment is. And it probably, like, even comes back around and refreshes sometimes. And that's the other thing. It's problem is, things are always changing a lot. So I was talking to some guy the other day. I was guest on his podcast, and he was like, saying something about, I don't know, having to change what he's doing right now because of everything. And I was like, you mean pivot? He's like, I've never heard that before. I'm like, yeah, it's like the most common thing ever. Because he was talking about, like, oh my God, I have to do this thing differently. And I was sort of saying how that's what everyone has to do all the time.
That's the whole thing. Is a series of pivots. Like, that's, I think about that a lot because I feel like, I don't know. I don't actually think I'm a contrarian. I'm pretty, like, chill, but there's certain things that will rub me the wrong way if I hear them too much. And one of them is I'm really crazy about, like, the growth mindset and grit and discipline and going after stuff. But at some point, that whole thing of, like, just keep swimming, I'm just like, yeah, but if you're going the wrong direction, you're just getting further and further away. So that to me, I'm all about that series of, ebb and flow of, all right. Like, when I started the podcast, I didn't think, oh, let me try 5 episodes and see how that goes. I thought, I'm going to do 100 episodes. Even if it's the worst thing ever and everybody hates it, that's how much data I need to know. And, and 100 episodes in, like, I was still nowhere close to where it was going to go and what was going to happen with it. But it gave me enough kind of qualitative data to know that I was on to something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get enough feedback so you can move forward knowing you're not just like pissing in the ocean kind of thing.
Yep.
Where you feel like you're actually doing something.
And I think that I did another project early on in my career, an illustration project, where I was doing a bunch of them, where I was doing like 10 pieces in this world or 10 pieces in that world. And I did one for one that went really wrong that I had to pivot hard away from was I was making new book covers for books from the public domain. So, and then
Oh yeah.
and I thought this would be really cool. And I made one for Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and whatever, Moby Dick. And when I made the Moby Dick one, someone on, this is how stupid I was. Like somebody on my Twitter was like, "Oh man, this is awesome. How'd you like the book?" And I was like, I didn't read the book. I was like, I don't read fiction. And then I'm like, oh, this is not the right path for me. Like, I'm not going to be a book cover illustrator because I don't read fiction. Like, it's just not going to, you know what I mean? But I had to make that stuff to get to that uncomfortable moment of seeing what everyone in my life would have already known that was not a good fit. Because,
right.
You know what I mean? But that's an example of like, I had to swim that far out. I made like 6 or 7 of those or something before I realized like, oh, no. But the cool thing about crossing that off the list was now I never have to go back there. It's not like that was a waste. It was something, like if I hadn't ever done that in the back of my
you learned. If you didn't do it like that, you can't put a price on doing, what's that saying? No good deed goes unpunished. I always think about that saying, but I'm thinking about it in the wrong way. Like I always think about where if you spend a bunch of time doing something, even though it's a total waste, it's not a waste. So that's my version. I think about that phrase, even though I'm thinking about a totally different meaning, but just anything you do is something, you're taking steps. As long as you're doing something, you can't just throw that away. Because a lot of times I think, especially in entertainment, people get that imposter syndrome. I know I have for sure, where it's like you think you don't deserve something because of how easily it came to you. And then you realize like someone has to be like, dude, what do you mean easy? You've been doing this for this long and doing all this stuff like that. They prepared you for that. So it seems like that because of your perception of time and all, because our perceptions are so, I mean, we keep talking about this, I guess. It's similar to what I was talking about in terms of like who you are and what you like, because it's so really hard to have to be objective and have perception. And perception is so powerful. It's kind of, I sometimes can't believe the degree with which it affects things.
Yeah, that reminds me of I think it's I don't know. I want to say, I have no idea. There's a productivity guy, I can't remember his name, but he has a quote that says, your brain is for having ideas, not holding them. And I think that for me, and so his thing is like, he will just have this huge in and out box where everything that's on his mind, he will write on one sheet of paper and put it in this inbox. And then when it's like over with, he'll get rid of it. Right. But it's just this idea of like, for me, I make endless amount of lists, and I have a few frameworks that I'll use to go back to what you were saying with this whole feeling uncentered as an artist. Mm-hmm. Like this happens to, this is the main thing that feels like my work on the podcast and then in my own life is, how do you find your center and stay there as often as possible? It's like a tightrope walk. How do you get back to that true north where your energy is in the right place and you're able to execute on the kind of work that you want to be doing next? And I feel like there's so much about, we can't hold all that information. This is actually why I have this framework that I use. It's a 7-part thing. And it sounds really businessy and stuff. It's not. It's kind of almost like more like a spiritual path to me. Mm-hmm. It's why I'm so obsessed with the goal, but it's the goals are nothing about forcing something to happen. It's not anything about achieving. It's purely, for me, a goal is an embodiment of your industry, market, and niche. And I could use art words to say the same thing. We could say your field, your genre, and your subgenre. But they're the industry, market, niche, field, genre, subgenre. They're all the same things. In a goal, if you find the goal that perfectly summarizes those 3 things, then you can have that true north and you can feel integrated towards your center. Does that make sense, or am I using too much jargon?
I don't know. It kind of does. I think you should keep saying it.
Keep saying it.
I'll ask questions.
Okay, I'll give you an example of what I mean. So,
well, can I interrupt you real quick?
Yeah, sure.
So you're talking about, when we first started talking today, you were saying how when you got out of school, how you were frustrated because your professors and stuff wouldn't tell you how your style finds you, and you had to develop these tools to do that. This is just part of that?
Absolutely. So this whole thing, this whole framework is stuff. It's not a thing that I invented. In fact, later on, after I wrote it all down, everything, I would see fragments of these 7 things in other people's frameworks or perspectives or whatever. So to me, that tells me this isn't a thing I made up. It's a thing that I found. It's like, this is a real thing, and I just put some words to it. And so this whole thing comes from studying my favorite artists that were able to stay on that tightrope for the longest amount of time and consistently make stuff happen for them and go deeper and deeper into their best work. You know, there's always falling off and stuff, whatever, here and there. But, and what happened from studying them and then trying to communicate it, because I was already teaching a class at the art school here, through trying to communicate, these people have this thing, I started to notice this pattern. And so that's what this pattern is. And this is how I use this thing on myself weekly. Like I just did it yesterday. Okay. And the idea is,
what is it? What is it? What could it be?
So here it is. I'll tell you the whole thing,
okay,
and I'll give you an example of what I mean by it. So 1 is industry, 2 is market, 3 is niche. And you can think about those as like concentric circles that make a target. Industry is the big thing that you're part of, like the entertainment industry or the industry. And the market is like the segment of that where you fit, where your people are thriving. And then the next part down is your niche. Within that market, what's your little corner of it? Mm-hmm. So once you have that target, you can summarize that with 4, which is your goal. So if you're in the illustration industry, in the market of editorial, like magazines and newspapers, and then the niche of, you know, liberal, heady articles that you want to illustrate about psychology, then your goal could be, I want to make a full page illustration on the psychology page for the New York Times. And that goal says everything about your industry, market, and niche. So you don't have to keep any of that in your head once you have that target. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And also what you said there was really important, is the idea of you don't have to keep it in your head. Because I think that's what fucks up a lot of people, is having to like constantly remember something.
Yes.
When it's like if you're driving and you're always looking at the map, how stressful that is. And Absolutely. Also how, you can't relax. You can't like go into fucking theta if you're, or whatever wave state I mean to say, but you can't like, if you're always checking where you are, then it's just like, it's a shitty place.
And exactly. So there's a bunch of things that this does. And I feel like a lot of creative people, myself included for a long time, would have this knee-jerk negative reaction to a goal for whatever. And I have actually a bunch of ideas of why I think that is. But and maybe we can talk about that in a minute. But for me, this single point on the horizon, it's not about achieving it. It's about your center and your focus. So even if, no matter who you are, if you're a comedian or if you're a designer or whatever, there's always like, if you can figure out your industry, market, and niche, and then you can identify the goal that is perfect for that. And when I was talking to Seth Godin, and I said to him,
he's an illustrator, right? No, wait.
He's a marketer. He calls himself a marketer, but he's really more like a philosopher. And that's a compliment. And he's a really brilliant dude. I almost feel like he uses the word marketing as like a
smoke
trick.
Screen.
To get people in and kind of like try to help the world, because a lot of people that get into marketing are not always doing it for the best reasons.
Marketing is that's one of those sticky places.
It really is. It's dicey shit. So he said, I said to him, I was like, what would you tell an illustrator that wants to work for the New York Times? And the first thing he said was, find a different line. That line is too long. Like, find the magazine that's way closer to your niche. That's way more a better personal fit for you. And so if you can find that little point on the horizon, like, for comedy right now, it might be, and because I'm not immersed in that world, I don't know, but I imagine a lot of goals for comedians are have a Netflix special. Well, is there something that is, what we're going to say?
Or have a special. It's like a thing where,
right.
Yeah.
Have a special. And I think that if you get really granular in your industry, market, and niche, you can find that actually, the same goes for my kids' books. So like, if a lot of illustrators that want to make a kid's book, they might think, I want Penguin to publish it because it's the first one that comes to mind and they're the biggest. But the closer you get in the granular level of who you really are and where you fit in your industry, market, niche, you might know actually Chronicle Books, they're an indie publisher, they're a smaller publisher, but they are the perfect fit. And if I focus my energy on making that happen, I will stay within my voice because they're a reflection of me.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that's a great point because a lot of times stuff is, people want the thing that's what's the word? It's the fad. So many things are like fad driven, and there's a better word for that. But there's so many things, especially entertainment, that it's like the this has a lot of cachet right now, and it's so everyone wants that same thing. It's like chasing a moving target, and it's also just this thing where,
I also think it's kind of like, exactly that. But it's also kind of like hearing thunder and then going and trying to chase that lightning bolt. Like
wow, that's good, man. That's great because
it's already happened.
It's so dumb to chase the thunder. Yeah, it's over.
So that I think of, and I go and I think about that a lot because I've even recently decided to double down on podcasting. And for a long time, I wouldn't. And it was this idea of like, there's no Emmys. I'm getting my ego. This isn't like my normal thoughts. I'm not like much of an egomaniac where I'm like, well, there's no Oscars for podcasts, so I got to get out of this. I don't actually think that, but I find myself on a subconscious level, I want to have a best-selling book or a biggest TED Talk because that's what the world says, then you're validated. But podcasts, because they're new, relatively speaking, there's no romance in them. But I feel like every artist that does their thing in their time, they have to do it in, areas where the establishment looks as less than. It's like, oh, you have a podcast. Wow, cool. You know what I mean? Picasso, when he starts doing cubism, everybody in the art world's like, this isn't art. This is, but that's all we think of as his work. So it's always about how do you cannot be Bob Dylan now. It's not going to happen. Like, you can't be the Beatles. You can't even be Sufjan Stevens. I don't know, whatever. That's gone. So
it's done. It's all done. So much of that stuff is just, the ship has sailed so long ago. And the idea that you can ever have any sort of traditional career is laughable. And it's almost like a thing where if you are going to have a traditional career, it's not going to be because you wanted it. It's going to be because it's just sort of how things shook out. Yeah. And you can't pursue that.
No, you can't. I think about it too, like those paths to success are these places where that road has been paved and there are vendors, cottage industries alongside it to help you get down the road and make it easy on the road and teach you everything you need to know. And, and if you're on a road that's that, you're seeing all these people making money off of you and it's all really convenient and clean. Like the treasure's gone at the end of that road.
Yeah, it's like that old shit with the people who made the most money in the gold rush were the people who sold the tools.
Exactly. And so I think about how, what you want to look for is where are there still booby traps? Because where's their wilderness? And it's just, like podcasting, when I got into podcasting was a better time than it is now because all of that information wasn't consolidated to be like, start a podcast with a click. Like it was, I had to figure out hosting and micro and all, it's just messy stuff. But that was all the wilderness. And like, a week, I started, my podcast launched the same week as Serial. And it was like, that was like a good time for starting a pod. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I started podcasting before it was anything. And now it's like, it's weird for me because I've had to like really reassess a lot of stuff. And I still am right now even. And I even have this other plan how I'm going to change the podcast, because you basically can't do the podcasts that I used to do anymore. If you do, there's two different audiences. There's the most people who listen to podcasts want really, what's the word? Just very kind of not mediocre, but just very easily digestible fare. It's not too long. It's always the same length. It's very, very narrow bandwidth and super consistent. And it's most people don't want something that's like this sort of like bizarre thing. They want something very toned down. And I think that's fine.
Sure.
Things have changed so much to where if you're not going to do that thing that people want, you have to be okay with your podcast not getting the traditional, not being seen by the same people, because it's just not, it's a different world.
That gets into a really interesting question that I'm obsessed with, which is, when I decided, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, something like that, I decided I want to be a good illustrator.
Mm-hmm.
I had to figure out what is good illustration. And in the design world of the time, which I was, kind of on the periphery of, designers love talking about what's good design. They're so like, I don't know why. But
dude, they're the worst.
They want to talk about it all the time. So there's all these definitions. Everyone's arguing about it. But in illustration, I hadn't even seen anybody ask that question. Like, what the hell is illustration trying to do? What is a successful illustration? Like what's the theory? What's the philosophy behind it?
Yeah.
And I didn't see any of that. But I feel like this pursuit, no matter what you do, you should have, well, I don't like that. I suggest having a definition of good. And the reason I say that is, this is one of the reasons why I think comedy is so, especially stand-up, is so hyper-developed as a craft.
Yeah.
The target is so clear. Laughs. We get laughs and we can measure it. Like but with illustration, it was like, was that a successful illustration or not? And you're like, I don't know. How do I measure that?
That's true.
Yeah. And so I think podcasts, that's a question I've been asking for 3 or 4 years. What is a good podcast? And you just hit the nail on the head with all this, like starting to unravel, because it's never existed before. We consume it in a totally different way than anything. It has some things in common with other audio spoken word stuff, but it's not the same as radio, and it's not the same as a talk. Like, if you try to make your podcast like a TED Talk every week, it's going to fail because that's too intensive information.
Yeah, it's too much.
And so you've got to figure out, what does it mean? What are people, because they're digesting it passively. And, for one thing, like at the time when podcasts started to kick off, lots of people were like, these things are too long. Like, people don't want to, Joe Rogan 3-hour stuff. But the truth is, certain types of podcasts, they do want that because they use it to get through long periods of things.
Yeah, like I've had this guy I know who worked in a chocolate factory. He listens to my podcast and he loves like the 2-hour podcast. He loves the ones that are long as shit.
Because if as soon as that episode's over, he has to choose another episode.
You gotta wipe the chocolate off your hands. You gotta dig out the iPod. You gotta do all this stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, it's hard.
The podcast is it's such a good, but that's why, to me, that's one of the reasons I've been doubling down on that industry market and niche just recently. I did this process with myself recently. That's kind of the place I went for, because it's still the Wild West. It's still early days. People don't know really what is a good podcast. So there's still tons of room to figure that out.
Yeah. I mean, it just seems like the best stuff is just the stuff that people who've done the most of it, because it has the most, it's like anything. If you do something a lot, you have like a natural fluidity to what you do. And that is always nice. It's always nice to to listen to something that feels like it's not precious and it's not being done from a place of fear. It's not from a place of like, you're very relaxed in what you're doing.
I completely agree. And I also, one of my other things that I think a lot about in terms of creativity is the idea of taste. And I feel like a lot of people, I don't know, we have so much association with what that means. But when I say it, I mean, I'm speaking of like, your taste buds, like a sweet tooth has a taste for sweet things, or, if you're into beer, you have something about your palate that reads these different notes. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's the other thing going on with the people that succeed in podcasting is they have a good taste for, it's a metal detector for, ooh, this is good podcast. This is like what we're doing right now. Like that's and to me, that's, the people that can sense that have that taste, they can produce it because they can reverse engineer the recipes. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Taste is always so elusive. I sometimes just forget, like, I get like really, I don't know, confused and feel kind of lost. Cause I'm like, what do I like? I can't remember what I like because I oftentimes will forget how much stuff I don't like. And it's hard when there's so many things you're seeing that are being lauded and they're being like, getting all this attention and press. And you're like, I don't like this thing. And it's like this weird gnashing of worlds and like crossing of wires. We're like, oh, why is this thing that people like so much? Why do I hate it? And it's not like I hate it because it's popular. It's like, I really just don't find this interesting. And I want to, the stuff that I do find interesting, I find it to be like, wow, this is so much more interesting than this other thing. And it's, I don't know, to me, I feel like I get feeling like I'm lost a bit because I don't know, sometimes I find things like that have to do with nature, like pictures of animals and anything having to do with the natural world to be so much more interesting than anything on TV or anything in the celebrity world whatsoever, that I just can't even believe that I do what I do.
Right. Yeah. But I think that's really, I think that totally makes sense, because I think a big part of the journey of an artist is, you like something, like probably early on you were really into comedy, even as a kid or whatever. Yeah. But eventually, once you start really obsessively trying to dismantle and dissect what's funny, what do I like, and you consume tons of things, just like a chef, right? Like at first they might just like food, but once you get deep into it, like you find less and less things that surprise you and light you up, right? Mm-hmm. And so like once you're that deep into it, the only thing you can do, and this is where I think like the artist is born, is make things that fulfill all of the things that you love, because nothing exists anymore. So it's weird, because that means that a lot of people that will get into illustration or get into design or whatever, they will lose their taste for what already exists. And they only they have to make stuff to light up their taste buds.
Yeah, you have to make the thing you want to see.
Exactly.
Because there's so few things that if you start to have problems finding the things that you want to see and hear and whatever it is, whatever the product is, then you start to get like depressed and you start to like just feel kind of this ennui. But it's because you're not, if you're dependent upon outside sources for stimulation and you're not finding these novel things anymore, you fall into this ditch. But especially if you're not creating the things that you don't have, then that's like a bad place. Yeah.
That's a bad place. And I think a lot of people get burnout and sick of their stuff because fuel for the first half of their trajectory was other people's work. That was their inspiration. And then when that doesn't do it for them anymore, if they don't convert into that inner inspiration, because now for me, it's like when I get a job, like I always have to clarify, not because I'm hurting or anything, but I just don't want to discourage a good project coming my way. But when I get a job and it's just like, just do your little style thing on this, I'm just like, that's not, I don't care about style. It that used to do it for me, but I just am not a fan of illustration like that, like I used to be. What I'm much more interested in is in things that I have to say with my style. And so that's where I find inspiration is, I was listening to this podcast and I was reading this book, and then I had that experience, and then I had a mental breakthrough that I'd never heard anybody say this idea. And I found an analogy for how to say it. And then I can use my style and taste for illustration and all that stuff to communicate it. But by the time I do that, illustration is just an afterthought. I don't care. I don't care what the form is, the medium is. And so I feel like if you're doing it right in that stage, hopefully you get to a point where you're a little bit like, over the whole hype of the thing. You're just,
yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does make sense. The other thing I also kind of noticed this kind of recently that I don't know if you think this is true as well, but I think when you get to that place where you're not really finding the stuff that inspires you as much because you have to start creating it. Yeah. I think this probably sounds really obvious and maybe even like, I don't know, just like a shithead idea, but just how much harder it is, how much harder you have to work on your own stuff to create the stuff that you like than it was before. It's this thing I noticed. I'm like, oh my God, this is so much harder. I can't believe the degree. It's almost exponentially more difficult than it was 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, that's definitely true for me. So I've
it's just fucking crazy though. It sucks.
Yeah.
It
is like I've made this kid's book this month. I was like working on this kid's book, and it took me so much longer than any other book that I've ever made. And it was because of that. It's because it was so many things I needed to do for it to be what I considered good. And the same goes for an episode. Like the longer the podcast goes, the more time I spend on every episode, because it takes that much more. I'm that much pickier in my taste for it to feel like I got it. Yeah.
It's crazy. I never heard anyone say that before. It's weird. Like you hear a lot of the opposite, like it gets easier, but I've never heard anyone say like, hey, just so you know, if you figure out your shit and you find a voice and you really like what you have to say, that it's going to be so much significantly difficult and you have to put in so much more time than you would on anything else.
Yeah. I have a theory about that.
Oh, I want to hear this.
My theory is that that might be the middle phase. So like one thing I think about when I feel like you see there's comedians in 3 camps, and I guess I go to them because they have so many podcasts. So I've listened to so many, I've listened to it. You know what I mean? Like I've heard their path so much more than other artists. Yeah. And I think there's people in 3 camps. And to me, it seems like it's a sequence. So like, you have people that they don't know what they're doing. They don't know how it works, but they just know that they got to play. They got to and so they stick with that. And then the next phase is they start realizing there's patterns and there's a craft and there's practice, and they start, tearing it down and deconstructing it. But when you do that, that's where it gets really hard. It gets really like muddy because you're so in your head and you're in your, I believe it's like your prefrontal cortex when you're in like planning and execution mode.
It's basic. It's kind of like grunt work almost. It's actual work that is not, it's not fashionable. It's not interesting. It's not glamorous at all. It's really just like time spent.
Yeah. It's real work. It's not super fun. But it's in that, but what I think happens is they start going into that deconstruction. And sometimes I think it gets in that middle, even the more you know, the less good the stuff gets because you're so deconstructed and you're so in the not part of your play zone. And so, but then I think you see people, the real masters are the people that travel through that and return back to play. And I think of it like sports where, there's the people out just on the court playing, and then there are people that learn how to do a jump shot right and how to, practice right and all that. But if they take that mental game into the game, they're not better because they're in their head. It's how can you get past, because you can't, it's that you can't write and edit at the same time.
Yeah.
So that you got to figure out how do you, someone said, there's like a really famous one of like, how do you learn all the rules and then forget all the rules and then do it? I feel like
I know what you're saying there. Exactly. I feel like that for like, in terms of acting, it's a very easy metaphor or way to translate it, because it's like, if you're just doing improv, you're in the moment and you're 100% playing. Then if you're rehearsing, you're going off of that. But I think what I found recently is that when the bigger the thing, the more important, the more like, I don't know, the larger the project and the more you're trying to say, it just takes that much more rehearsal. It's almost like an exponential amount of more rehearsal to get to a place where when you're actually doing the thing, you can be real cavalier and relaxed and play with it.
That's exactly.
It just takes so, like I found out the hard way a couple times. I'm trying to develop this hour-long show, just how much I have to do to get to the place where I can go back to being how it was the first time I did it. Was fucking gangbusters, right? It was awesome. It was great because it's the first time. And I have this new thing now I realize is that the second show of something is always the worst. It's the worst.
I know exactly. Yeah. I have the same experience with the talks that I do. I do like a talk that is kind of in between an educational thing and kind of a one-man show thing, if I'm so bold to say something so ridiculous. You
might as well just say
I'm saying
there's a lot of comedians who have comedy shows that aren't funny. So you might
like that. It's I have a great time doing it. But what I learned was I have to. It's similar to when I used to do interviews when I was much less experienced doing that on the podcast. I would do no prep because I'm like, oh, it's just better when it's casual. And then it would bomb. And then I would do crazy prep and it would go well, but I wouldn't use any of the prep. And so
man.
Then I'd think, all right, I guess I don't need to prep. And then I'd go into a one with no prep and then bomb. And so it was like, oh, I need to
back and forth.
Prep like a maniac. And then the same goes for when I go on stage to do my talk, prep like freaking crazy. But then the second I go on stage, forget it. Just completely disconnect with all of the prep and let it be. I've read, I was reading this book about tennis. It's just this like muscle memory. Just once you've packed it in there, then it's about let your subconscious do the job. Don't think about your form. Don't think about, I got to make sure I hit all those points. Just flow. Just do that.
Yeah, that's so true. That's one of those things where it's like it's the kind of thing I knew for a long time. I guess it took me till very recently to realize that for myself, when it's something I'm doing, I have to work just so much more on the thing in terms of preparation than I would for someone else's thing, because it's like almost like I can't fool myself.
Mm-hmm.
I can fool. Yeah, it's that weird thing where if you're stepping into someone else's thing, I can play so easily. But when I can't, it's so much harder to play with yourself. That's a quote for the week.
I had my brother and my dad both do public speaking in their professional work, and they're always like, cannot believe how much energy I put into prepping for my talks. Like, and it is pretty insane. Like I go through a crazy process. But I think once you have tasted the joy of the flow state after a preparation like that, that's where you get those people. And I think you see it in stand-ups too. Like that's why they go through months and months and months of prepping and testing and all that stuff. Because when you do, it's like an out-of-body experience. When you're that in the pocket there, like, you're like, I'll do anything for this. This is better than drugs. This is better than sex. It is like, it's an amazing feeling to be in that.
It's so funny you say that, because I was also about to say it's like being a heroin addict, where it's like I've been on heroin for so long that it takes so much more heroin to get me high now.
Yes.
And I keep forgetting like how much heroin I have to do to get high. I have to do so much heroin. I'm like, really? This much heroin? I have to do this much? And my body's like, yeah, man, you have to do an hour of heroin. Otherwise it just won't work. You won't get the fucking jazz.
Yeah. I'm going to take that audio clip out of context.
I need to do so my tolerance is astronomical now. It's ridiculous.
But I think just to push back on it, because I think that soils the truth of it. The reason why, to me, it's so much better than heroin or whatever. I wouldn't,
right.
But is because I think we're primarily social animals. And when you're doing something, you're making a gift for other people with that much love and intention and everything. And you're watching it be received. That's why you're on the planet. So when you're doing that, you prep this whole show for somebody and you watch people enjoy it. You're like, I matter. And it's meaning. And I know there's all kinds of ways that can get out of hand. And I'm sure, lots of artists have been there too. But I do think that's why we're here. And I think if you can figure out how to matter to other people intentionally, I do think that's a good thing. I'm sure there's a lot of Buddhists and such that would disagree with that kind of attachment or something. But
I don't know. I think they would actually what you just said sounds very Buddhist in that sense. There's a lot of Buddhist philosophy where I find it kind of goes both ways, where something that seems like it would be antithetical to it is actually 100% in line with it. It's kind of that the things that wrap around the back end, like you've got like crazy right-wing preppers who are very similar to a lot of like super left-wing commies.
Yes.
When they meet on the street, like, you into this? Yeah, I remember that too. Who you voting for? Right? Like, no. It's like the same fucking, they're really similar.
Yeah, that's one of the things that is the most attractive about Buddhism to me, is that it is so non-dual. It's
it's super pliable, and you can put it on anything. You can be a Buddhist Catholic.
Yes. Yeah. So I do think that and I think that's truer to experience, is that there's this, the Niels Bohr quote of, the opposite of a profound truth might be another profound truth. That's the nature of truth.
I don't think I've heard that before.
It's a good quote. But
he's a physicist, right? Astrophysicist?
Yeah. And so I think that, I feel like that Buddhism does that really well, whereas a lot of other religions are more like toddler. Oh, man, I'm just like.
Just say it.
Religious system. No, but I think that there's or at least the way they're interpreted and practiced. I'll say that. That's safer.
Yeah.
In the modern world is more like a toddler consciousness. I've been thinking about this all the time. Like when you have a toddler, you don't tell the toddler, okay, this is the oven. It's used for a lot of great things. The oven is bad. It's black and white. You know what I mean? Whereas once you get older, you realize like, oh, reality's there's a lot more nuance to truth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't tell the toddler that, because the toddler's like, they'll figure it out. But right now you have to know this will kill you.
Yes, exactly.
Or at least be very expensive to fix.
Yeah.
You may lose your hand or, that kind of shit. Yeah.
You know what? When I was a kid, I wish my mom would have told me that about the oven. This is a weird thing that I don't know if I've ever talked about this thing, but when I was like, 6 years old, I was at my mom's house, and she's like ADHD weirdo, like not the best parent. I'm sorry, Mom. She'll never hear it.
Okay.
I love her. She wasn't made to be a mom. And she left the iron on, and I went in there and I put it on my face.
How old are you?
I think I was like 6.
Wow.
And then before I realized what had happened, I put it on the other side and evened it up.
You look great, Andy. You look fucking good, man, for a kid who put a fucking iron on his face.
Luckily, my dad is a good dad, and he changed my gauze. And can you imagine? Like, I spent the weekend with her like once a month or something, and then she passed me back off to my dad, like, take him to the hospital, put this band. You're gonna have to remove these. Like, yeah.
That's insane, man. That's fucking a good friend of mine. His grandma, his mother was watching his kid, and the little kid did the classic thing of pulled over the teapot on herself and she's like a 2-year-old, always burns all over her chest and stuff. She's great now, but man, fucking kids are goddamn tough.
Man, when I have this vivid imagination, so I would say like once a day with my kids, I'll think about what if they just ran out into the road and got hit by a car, and I play the movie in my mind to the point of I always have a physical reaction. Like if you were watching me all the time, you would see me once a day be like, and it happens all the time. So I'll think, what if when my kid comes down in the middle of the night, he just falls down the stairs, and I just have this super vivid memory or, picture of what that would look like. It's like trauma all the time. But yeah.
Do you meditate?
I don't. No, I don't meditate. I don't know.
Hey, why not?
Why not?
Yeah, why not?
It sounds boring. That's the truth.
It sounds boring. Okay.
And I'm not saying like I'm very driven by not being bored. That's okay. I think that's the quintessential ADHD thing. I don't think everybody knows that. I think that's it. Is that ADHD? You don't have good executive function, so you're like a toddler brain, and you're just like, nope, don't want to do that. It sounds boring. I don't like it. And so I don't. That's why I don't want to meditate. But I will say, no. What were you going to say before I?
Well, I mean, what you're talking about, like having that mental thing.
Yeah.
So when I learned meditation years ago, they talk about how there's no bad thoughts, right? Everything you're thinking is fine. There's a lot of ideas about meditation that are completely wrong and misguided. The whole idea of clearing your mind.
Yeah.
Somehow that got out there, and it's absolute fucking hokum.
Yeah.
And because it's like the analogy that I was told was that it's like, do you want to clear your heart of blood? No, your heart's job is to pump blood. So, and your brain's job is to think. So with meditation, you are definitely thinking stuff. And a lot of times what happens in meditation is you think something terrible. I'll think about something like me getting my hand chopped off with an axe, or just something that makes me do that. And it happens all the time. But I think of it as, and I think this is, other people have talked about this, like meditation teachers have talked about how meditation is sort of like a digester for negativity. It like takes it and it contextualizes it, or like a white blood cell. A white blood cell wraps around the invader and carries it out. It digests it. And so I think about a lot of times when you think about something bad, you're preparing yourself for it to happen. So it won't be as bad. Like when I was working on this TV show, It Was Way Dangerous, I would always imagine the different ways I could die in the situation we were shooting. It was like super dangerous stuff. I was like, okay, this can happen, this can happen, this can happen. And it sounds like I'm being super morbid, but actually I think it's the opposite, where it's like, I really, really don't want to die. So I'm going to think about all the ways I could die. So I don't, because I think death wants to surprise you. I really do. I honestly think you can cheat death by fucking, you know how a mountain lion or a tiger doesn't attack you if you're looking at it? Same way. I think it's that.
So I'm gonna chew on that. That's great.
So I think you thinking about that stuff is probably, I doubt that. Yeah, it's you like being prepared for this reaction, this thing.
My mom, like, and I mean, it's so funny because my mom doesn't have internet. I literally can say whatever I want about her. And we don't have a great relationship, but it does. That's the thing that I don't think that she did. She didn't think, oh, he could take this iron and put it on his face. But I think about that stuff all the time. So I'm pretty good for the most part, knock on wood, for stopping catastrophe with my kids. One thing when you said about meditation, I don't know if this might put us on to a totally different weird wavelength, but it's something I've just been thinking about all the time. Is and it's such a polarizing idea. Okay, so I'm sorry if your listeners might hate this, but
I like polarizing, and who cares?
Okay, so I started thinking about this idea of speaking in tongues. No one's gonna like this. Okay,
you'd be surprised, man. People do a lot of drugs to listen to this shit.
Okay, maybe they will. This might be the perfect setting.
Look at this thing.
What is that?
It's normal.
I like it. Definitely. It's normal.
It's normal to me, at least.
So I started thinking about speaking in tongues, not a practice that I've ever actively participated in. I've never been an active practitioner. But I grew up in the Midwest, and I spent a lot of time I've been in like almost every type of church I've visited.
Seventh-day Adventist?
No, I haven't done that.
There you go.
Maybe it's less than I think, but enough to where I have family members that are charismatic Christians that speak in tongues and all that kind of stuff.
I'm covered in his blood.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I started yesterday, I think I started thinking about, I wonder what, and I'd heard a little bit about this before, someone speak to it, but what that does to the brain. Because I knew they had done, like Harvard had done like studies of like people speaking in tongues in the same way that they did with meditation.
Uh-huh.
But what does it do to the brain? And it's super fascinating because they said it's almost the opposite of meditation, not in a way, but in the Niels Bohr way of like, it has other benefits. There's all the, like, you speak in tongues regularly, your cortisol is like, levels are really low and like all these things. And so anyway, I'll just say that speaking in tongues I guess I would consider myself a mystic, and maybe not in the way that a charismatic would think about it, is more interesting to me. I also do this clanging thing all the time. You know what that is?
No.
Clanging is like, and I don't know what this is, but I'm very obsessed with the phonetics of a word. So I get into these.
Oh, me too. Big time.
Yeah. I get into these, like, I'll have words that are like in a bucket and they'll be like churned to where they'll leave, like they'll come back and there's things I go to, but I'll walk around the house and I'm speaking nonsense all the time, just like making rhymes and saying weird words and coming up with phrases, and also like trying to surprise myself by saying something that I didn't expect I was going to say. And it's especially, it's what it's called, is the psychology term is clanging.
I didn't know that. I always thought it was just like me being like a lunatic, like just loving to say like, oh, like come up with a name like, oh, this is fucking Richard Kickfick.
Yeah.
He's a fucking, he works for, just come up with, sometimes I would just sit on an airplane for an hour and write down names, like weird names.
Yeah, so it's just like this phonetic thing, and it's just this.
It's a sound too. It's a sound because I only share them with a few of my friends, like old friends who are musicians, and they will laugh at these names like, "Oh, that's fucking Budger's Ledge up there. That's where fucking like Dick Farthead." Not that's a bad one, but it's more like, "Oh, that's Cliff Boop."
Yes,
or just like weird sounding names that are funny just because they sound funny.
Of it, and it's fun, and if you like, it feels good. And reading Jim Henson's biography, I found out that he had a similar thing. That's why Muppet.
I didn't know this. This is
like just he loved finding a word. Like there's a bird, grackle. That bird.
One of my favorite words, grackle.
Word, yes. So
yes, grackle.
He will just he was the same, and he would just like collect this phonetic word. So I'll just like walk around saying that crap. So to me, man, this is where it gets dicey. That's what it feels like. I imagine that feels similar to speaking in tongues. And that's why that sensation is more interesting to me than meditation. So I'm like,
well, see, this is about to get sewn up. Well, go ahead. It cuts you off. This audio shits. You were saying,
no. I was just saying that. So I researching that the other day, that became a lot more interesting to me than meditation. And I also thought, and maybe this is where it starts. I thought someone's got to say, "Hey, man, this is where it's dicey, but anybody can do it. Just go try it." That's like in those circles, that's very sacrilegious to say.
The speaking in tongues?
Yeah, that anybody could do it, and it's not their. What's the word? Like
truth, their soul
mark to it. They don't, it's not their proprietary IP. And well, the truth is, then you go deeper into that, like in India, I believe, there's Kundalini. It's the same. I don't think they would say it was the same thing, but if you look at it, it's very similar.
Well, there's Vedic meditation, and Vedic meditation is one of the oldest forms of meditation. And I do transcendental meditation, which is based in Vedic meditation, which is based on a mantra.
Yeah.
And that is the same. Like I tried a bunch of meditation styles before landing on TM, and they didn't stick because they didn't have that aspect of it. Because to me, the only other thing I've actually found to be nice is there's a form of thing called Nichiren Buddhism where you chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, and that's very, it's verbal and you chant it out loud, and it has like this rhythmic quality to it. And even the basis of the religion is what Nam Myoho Renge Kyo actually means. Is basically, it means what it is. It's like the sound of the sound kind of thing. It's a weird. It's right. I think
almost like onomatopoeia. It's like is that right?
But what you're saying though is 100% the same as meditation in that sense, where it's this thing where you're you're cycling through a thing that has like a rhythmic quality to it, and it creates it's almost like if you swirl your hands in water, you're going to create this whirlpool, and that's what you're doing, which is why I think that you would probably love that type of meditation.
I probably would. I like the only thing that I like about speaking nonsense. By the way, let me just say this. There's the tension that I'm feeling is that the camp that I'm part of, there's no camp that I'm part of. Basically, I feel like by talking about speaking in tongues, I will both upset people that are on there's no place where you can speak about that where you're not offending somebody by what you're saying. But
I don't think you're offending anybody, honestly. I really don't. Also, I could give a shit about anyone being offended by it.
To actually embody that more in my, public life of how do and actually my therapist, I was doing therapy yesterday, and she was saying like, you need to do that, man. You need to be like, because I was talking about the kind of groups of friends that I feel in the middle of, and and how I feel like I don't fit. And it's that same thing back to Yoda Gandalf thing of like, I do feel like I'm on the edge of like talking about speaking in tongues is a thing where that's me going out on my own road. Nobody's, you know what I mean? Like there's nobody that's happy about this. If I'm not in the charismatic Christian, if I'm saying, yeah, you're speaking gobbledygook in my mind, that's really offensive to them. But then also it's the non-religious I'm assuming are suspect of that kind of talk. But that is the kind of stuff that I want to do in my creative work, is I want to find those pockets. And I think like Sigur Rós, that they're an example of somebody who did that in a secular way. Like that, lots of their lyrics are that thing.
They're also from Iceland, right?
Yeah, so they got away.
I think that it's pretty well known that most Icelandic people, I think like 80% of people in Iceland believe in gnomes.
Right.
Like people, you can stop a businessman on the street, be like, oh yes, gnomes, they're real. Like they're fantastical people.
Yeah, maybe. So, but yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but that's the kind of stuff that I've been reflecting on of the next places I want to go, or the no man's lands of, nobody's talking or thinking about that. And it's
Dr. Seuss.
Yeah. I mean, I love Dr. Seuss. He's again, crazily good at the phonetics.
Dickens.
I don't know that as well, but
I don't know him that well either, but I know that Charles Dickens used to basically walk 6 or 7 hours a day. And he would write most of his stuff as he's walking, but also all of his characters, he started with their name.
Really?
Yeah, that's where he would start the character, is the name. And I feel like for me, I learned that like long after I started doing characters, but for me, I always start a character. Their name to me is super important because it feels like, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, about the idea of like who you are at face value is so important, because it really is. It's kind of like that's
an anchor. It's going to center you. You have to have something to hold on to with that. And that center back full circle to all of that. That's my primary goal for creative people, is how do you get centered? Because I feel like we all know the difference between creating from a place of inspiration, centered, intention, and then just being like, what the hell am I doing? Who am I? I don't know what's going on. Yeah.
When you said that you were talking about the circle, like the industry, the market, the niche, and then the goal, You said there was a 7-part thing. What is the 7-part thing?
I'll give you the rest of it. There's also, this is kind of a plug, but it's not really.
No, actually do plug. Please plug.
I have a Skillshare class. It's about this. And it, you know, there you go. And it has all of them, but I'll tell you all of them
Let me just announce it real quick. Hold on.
The Andy J. Pizza Skillshare class. You look up under Andy, is that correct? Andy J. Pizza?
Yep.
Andy J. Pizza on Skillshare will teach you how to hone in on your creative profession in a way that you didn't think was possible before.
That's it. So the 7 steps: industry, market, niche, goal, project. The project is then a self-initiated thing you do. And the idea with that is it mirrors your goal exactly. So one of the examples I go to all the time is Good Will Hunting is a good example. They wrote the movie that they wanted to be cast in, right? So, and the more clearly defined your industry, market, niche, and goal, the more you can do that on purpose. And I loved that example of Good Will Hunting because I feel like they didn't mirror it well enough for both of them. So I've heard them talk about how they thought they were giving Ben a great part because he has the big monologues in the movie and it's like a character. But what happens is if you don't mirror your project to how you want to be perceived and typecast, you're putting all this, like everyone watched that movie and then thought Matt's a genius and Ben's a towny idiot. Because we typecast people with that surface level thing, you know what I mean? So you should be in control of that with the projects you make, of saying, this is who I want you to know that I am, rather than leave all these things up to chance. So making your own project is your chance to do that. That's 5. 6 is finding a back door. So, and it's the marketing component. And so this is about how to get your project in the door where you don't go to the front door of the Death Star. You got to find the, what is it? The exhaust valve.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my whole thing, like when I was trying to get into band posters, I didn't just go to my favorite band. I went to my favorite band's favorite band because they're more critically acclaimed and lesser known. So like back to that Seth Godin thing, the line's way smaller. So my first band posters were people who had their email address published to their website, and a lot of my favorite bands love these bands, but they're not getting emails all the time from illustrators wanting to do posters for them. Mm-hmm. That's taking that project, finding your back door to get into the place you want to get. And then the last one is the reinvent, pivot. So it makes the whole thing a cyclical process where you're just doing this over and over in your career. I think of it as like, this is the life cycle of a thriving creative practice. So, and the reinvention point, I always think about, Lorne Michaels was talking shit about Chevy Chase, saying like the difference between him and Steve Martin is Steve Martin had like 6 careers and Chevy Chase just had one groove, and you stay in that groove long enough and it's a rut, not a groove. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the natural life cycle, is that once you've done that project and you've tried to get it in back doors, then you step back and in the class, we have this flow chart. It's not a technical thing, but it helps you to go reverse look at your plan and say, where did this thing go wrong? Like for instance, like the book illustration thing I did, I went wrong in the market. Like I was in the right industry, it was illustration, but the market was the wrong thing. And then there were times where the goal was the wrong thing, but you can just work backwards and be like, oh, I need to do a new project and mirror it. I didn't mirror it well enough to the goal, or the goal was the wrong goal, or whatever. That's the whole thing. 7.
I love that. That's great. And people can check all this stuff out on your podcast as well, right?
Yeah, we talk about it all the time. That's one of the main through lines of all the shows, is this process that I use and thing I use. It's a tool for finding my mall map, you are here thing. I always think about it like, where am I in this journey? What part am I stuck in? As soon as I know that, I'm a lot more centered. I'm like, oh, I need to find my niche. Like you know what I'm saying? Like I'm without a goal. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm trying to find where that is.
Yeah, I think now is such a great time. Like I just like when I thought to have you on the podcast right now, it just seems like, I don't know, it keeps seeming even more and more like just a great time to do the thing you haven't done that you want to do, because it's kind of like, it's like free play right now. You can get with, because one of the biggest hurdles I think for a lot of people is like quitting your job, or basically having the initiative to say, hey, what I want to do is important enough to where I can like take up space and say it out loud. Like, I want to do this and not do that. And it's super, super hard for people, and understandably so. And so I think like right now is almost like a window of time where everyone's so freaked out. There's so much stress right now. This is what I kind of keep thinking is, I was talking to my wife, Britt, about this, because she's very, very wise in a lot of these things that make me like, she just understands it so much more. But like the idea of kind of like right now, I feel like it's a time when you don't have to worry about what anyone's thinking about what you're doing. You don't have to be judgmental or feel any shame about anything, because there's so much of that going around for everything else that's sucking all that up. And also, you're not going to fucking make it through this shit if you do feel shame or guilt or any weird emotions around that, because it's going to fucking break you down, because you're stuck on this little hovel and you don't have the normal outlet. So you have to get your shit together. Otherwise you're going to turn into dust.
Yep. And that's where, when everything breaks down, that's where you're able to look into the shadow self, the part that you've been holding back at arm's length, trying to ignore. That's why in episode 269 of my podcast, I talk about I use my process. Part of the reason I built that creative journey process is because, one fundamental to my worldview, as cliche as it might be, is Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. So I use that narrative in a similar way to when I'm feeling like I've lost the thread of my life and I feel like I'm tetherless, then I ground myself in narrative, which is the hero's journey. And I look through the phases and I say, which one looks most like my life right now, so that I can fall into that and figure out, what do you do? What does the hero do when he's in the belly of the whale? And so as I was looking around, I'm like, first of all, it's amazing. Our whole world, for the first time maybe ever, is in the same stage of the journey. So like, there might even be this amazing emergent quality of what happens where we all come together as a super species, because that's crazy futurist optimism, but like, there's some interesting thing that can happen when we're all in the same place at the same time. You look at the belly of the whale. This is what I was talking about in that episode, that what they do, the character has to face what they're repressing or face the call that they're refusing. And so that's a great time to step back and say, in the call you're refusing, that's Jonah and the whale, where he's refusing to go to that land that God tells him to go. So that's when he's in the belly of the whale. But in Star Wars, it's Han and Leia, when they go in the cave that's really a worm, they're repressing their feelings for each other. So they got to face that repression. So I feel like you're totally right. This is such a pivotal moment for creative people or anybody to step back and say, what's the shit that I've been pretending isn't there? What's the stuff that I've wanted to explore so bad that's so true to me, but I've had all the excuses of time and money and shame and parental judgment, all that stuff, all that's gone. So now is the time to go into the cave that Joseph Campbell to say, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. What's the cave in you and your taste and all that it's time. This is the time to go in that cave.
This is the time. Go into the cave.
Go in the cave. Go in there.
Find some good stuff. Yeah. Andy J. Pizza podcast is Creative Pep Talks. It's we're the finest podcasts are sold online, and it's also for free. Check it out. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it, man.
Thanks for having me, man. This was very energizing for my soul.
Yeah, for real. Yeah. Great. Okay, I'm going to hit end meeting now. Ready?
Okay.
3, 2, 1.
Good, man.